Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we're discussing the World Health Organization's Global Digital Health Certification Network. Boy howdy, I've been talking about so-called vaccine passports for some time now, and I'm not a fan. For those who've been watching this channel for a while, you're probably well aware I'm not a fan at all of these things. I view this as heightened surveillance. Quite honestly, I view it as something akin to totalitarian surveillance. And I don't see where it's warranted, and honestly, I don't see where it's done any good in terms of public health. All it's really operated to do is act as a surveillance device, and it's one of the reasons at a national level many countries opted not to do it anymore. It didn't do anything with regard to assisting in increasing public health, so to speak. Not that the government has a mandate to surveil us all to that end anyway, not that they ever had that mandate, although they seem to think that they do. I don't know where they got that impression from. But I have to give a shout out here to Jimmy Dore, the Jimmy Dore Show over there. He's a comedian in the U.S., but he has kept up on this stuff, quite honestly, far more assiduously than many quote-unquote journalists have out there, and he deserves credit where credit is due. I've been keeping up with this stuff for some time. For those who watch this channel, we've been talking about it going back into 2020 and all the really weird sort of mandates and things that just came out of the woodwork because sort of governments around the world thought they could do it. Then meanwhile, as we discussed in other videos, the head of the the head of the WHO, Tedros, back during monkeypox, they convened a committee where they said they were trying to form a consensus as to whether or not monkeypox was a pandemic. The majority of the board said no, and then he just overrode it and basically said it was a pandemic anyway, notwithstanding that a majority of his own committee didn't agree with that. Then, and as we've talked about in other videos, his past, in my mind, is a little bit creepy, for lack of a better term. I mean, as we've discussed in other videos, and we've quoted and cited the sources, this is a person who was a member of the Communist Party in Ethiopia, and then somehow ended up the head of the WHO, and it makes one wonder, especially where they're working in league with countries like, communist China, and then they're working with people like Bill Gates who seem kind of obsessed with a kind of, again, Orwellian's really the only word for it, sort of an Orwellian infrastructure globally to track and trace everyone at all times under the rubric of, oh, it's for public health. And no one can ever seem to quite point to how exactly this operates in furtherance of better public health. To my mind, all it really seems to do is operates in furtherance of heightened surveillance. But again, shout out to Jimmy Dore for staying on top of this. I'm going to throw a link into the description below. I urge those to go over to that link because he goes into great detail. I'm going to quote some stuff here, but he goes into some great details about how all their discussion on this, and just, again, getting into the real nitty-gritty of just how creepy this stuff is. But I'm going to quote an excerpt from WHO, that's who.int, and then the announcement is titled, "The European Commission and WHO launch landmark digital health initiative to strengthen global health security." That's another Orwellian phrase. What in the heck is health security? I mean, viruses are not burglars. They're not an invading army. So what is global health security? Again, just these Orwellian phrases. Really creepy stuff. Quoting directly, the WHO, or the World Health Organization, WHO, and the European Commission have announced today the launch of a landmark digital health partnership. Quoting further, in June 2023, WHO will take up the European Union EU system of digital COVID-19 certification to establish a global system that will help facilitate global mobility and protect citizens across the world from ongoing and future health threats, including pandemics. Well, first of all, what is digital COVID-19 certification? What does that even mean? And in the aftermath of the last 3 years, in the aftermath of these COVID lockdowns and all of this, quite honestly, nonsense, the underlying premise for why all this was necessary, now in retrospect, is very clear it wasn't necessary to the levels that they took us to. And then they use all this kind of doublespeak or nonsensical language. Again, like, digital COVID-19 certification. COVID-19, what do you mean certification? What are you talking about? You know, if you're ill, the word for that is a diagnosis, and you deal with your illness. You know, you're certified COVID-free. What are we, cattle? USDA certification or something like this? It's really, really creepy language that they're using here. And then help facilitate global mobility. How does extra documentation, you know, sort of papers, please, but on a digital platform, how does that facilitate more mobility? Quoting further, this is the first building block of the WHO Global Digital Health Certification Network. So it's now going to be a network. And by the way, did anyone vote for this? Did anyone ask for this? You know, and it was my understanding at the beginning of this, yeah, there were some initiatives that were taken to go ahead and share information between countries about various diseases and, you know, how they were moving around. And then it morphed into this, it's a global, it's a surveillance certificate. It morphed into that. And it sort of did that behind the scenes while nobody was looking. And again, did any representative body anywhere in the world vote on this and vote for it? Even in the EU, did anybody in the EU vote for this? I'm happy to stand corrected in the comments. I'm happy to do another video and say, oh yeah, well, in point of fact, yeah, they did vote for this. But I brought this up before. Nobody's ever brought up where there's ever been a vote anywhere of the people of any jurisdiction that wanted this. So going back, this is the first building block of the WHO Global Digital Health Certification Network that will develop a wide range of digital products to deliver better health for all. How do digital products deliver health? Again, it's this weird language. It's this weird newspeak. Again, a wide range of digital products. What are those going to be? This is already scary, and I don't really want it. What is this wide range of digital health products going to be? I mean, quoting further, quote, with 80 countries and territories connected to the EU digital COVID-19 certificate, the EU has set a global standard. Well, because you say so? Sounds like the EU has set an EU standard and some other people have gone along for the ride. That doesn't mean that we're all now bound to it. Quoting further, the EU certificate has not only been an important tool in our fight against the pandemic, well, how so? What's the efficacy of that statement? I mean, they make these bold assertions. You know, it's my understanding France was utilizing this for like a minute and they stopped because it didn't do anything. The UK was the same way. They started doing it and then they stopped. It didn't. Where was the benefit to public health? How did tracking and tracing people do anything to mitigate a disease? Where did that occur? The EU certificate has not only been an important tool for our fight against the pandemic, but has also facilitated international travel and tourism. No, it has not. It has done the opposite. We dealt with people trying to leave the EU to come to Thailand when all of this was first implemented, and it was more difficult. It added documentation, it added hoops people had to jump through to engage in their international right to travel. And the right to travel is not only enshrined in an American context within the Constitution itself, the rights to travel are enshrined in the UN Charter of Human Rights. This documentation has not, and I quote, facilitated international travel and tourism. If anything, it operated to the opposite effect. It hindered it because you needed all this extra stuff to be able to do what a year prior to that you could have done just getting on a plane and going wherever you needed to go. Quoting further, I am pleased that the WHO will build on the privacy-preserving principles. Privacy-preserving principles? They're telling you have to put your medical history, your personal private medical documentation into a database to allow you to travel, a database that will be shared between international governments, presumably jurisdictions that aren't your home government jurisdiction. How does that preserve privacy? I am pleased that the WHO will build on the privacy-preserving principles and cutting-edge technology of the EU certificate to create a global tool against future pandemics. Again, where has this been proven to mitigate or forestall pandemics. All it's been proven to do is surveil people, from what I can see. And this isn't me talking at the beginning of 2020, effectively speculating on this. This is in the aftermath, where we know what this does. Quoting further, added Thierry Breton, Commissioner for Internal Market, one of the key elements in the European Union work against the COVID-19 pandemic has been digital COVID-19 certificates. Well, wow, what will we do without you people? You know, in my opinion, probably trying to figure out how to just deal with the disease would have been a better use of time and resources than trying to create some surveillance tool. Quoting further, to facilitate free movement within its borders, which again, that is such an Orwellian freedom is slavery, slavery is freedom kind of phrase. To facilitate free movement. Well, if you're adding something that's a document you need to move freely, and if you don't have it, you can't move freely, how does that facilitate free movement? Within its borders, the EU swiftly established interoperable COVID-19 certificates entitled, quote, EU Digital COVID-19 Certificate, or EU DCC. Based on open source technologies and standards, it allowed also for the connection of non-EU countries that issue certificates according to EU DCC specifications, becoming the most widely used solution around the world. Again, where they said privacy-preserving principles, how does that preserve privacy? Where people's personal medical data are shared between not only some international organization in the form of the WHO itself, which WHO gave them a mandate to deal with a person on a private level within their own country, but then also you're sharing all this data with other nations, other governments. When has it ever been required in the history of time that you share your personal medical data with others, with a state jurisdiction, with a foreign state, in order to simply travel? When has that ever been the case? I mean, and for those that say, well, we've had passports and things, not for that long. If you actually look at the history of passports, there's a great movie called The Tea with Mussolini. It has Cher in it, where it talks about the British, especially, would go on what was called these grand tours of Italy. And oftentimes they would take their young daughters, and that would be where they would be a debutante. They would sort of debut their daughter for purposes of courting and all of this when on these grand tours. They didn't have passports back then. They didn't utilize passports in the interwar period between World War I and World War II. Passports, they didn't exist. You used what were called letters of introductions and letters of credit through the banking system. That was it. You just got on a boat and you were a British person, you went to Italy, and that was what you did. So in point of fact, to the people that, and sometimes I get these weird trolls that I find them very strange because they only seem to be arguing just against freedom generally. It's a very odd argument to my mind. But I'll get these trolls from time to time that are, they'll come in and say, whoa, we've had passports for what? Yeah, we have. And there's actually good arguments maybe to be made that, do we really even need those? Those operate as effectively a surveillance tool. Now, that said, in the modern era, I'm not going to get into that. That seems like a bit of a silly argument, especially in the era of mass international travel. I can see where a passport is a good idea. But this, where you have to share your intimate health data with a foreign state, why do we need that? Whoever said, who was looking for that? And again, who was voting for that? Quoting further, from the onset of the pandemic, WHO engaged with all WHO regions. So what's a WHO region? Quoting further, to define overall guidelines for such certificates to help strengthen global health preparedness in the face of growing health threats. WHO is establishing a global digital health certification network which builds upon the solid foundations of the EU DCC framework, principles, and open technologies. Again, the verbiage here, just everything about this creeps me out. Orwellian is the only word I can really use to describe this. I hope Thailand sees this for what it is, that this is not something Thailand particularly needs. Again, the United States as well. These are not initiatives that, in my mind, are preserving principles of privacy or facilitating, movement or mobility. If anything, they're operating to the opposite direction. And those out there who are concerned about this, you know, it's probably time to start scrutinizing this stuff and talking to your local government officials and saying, hey, is this really what we want to be doing? Because on top of everything else, show me what was done effectively in response to this whole thing getting started back in 2020. And on top of that, a lot of the things that were said were misinformation or incorrect or misnomers. That it turned out to be quite the opposite at the end of the day. You know, the things that they said, oh, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about that. Show me what the so-called establishment was right about from the outset and was right about down the line. Show me. Where is this? Because I haven't seen it. And this stuff is really, really concerning. And I really, really hope that cooler heads prevail and we don't see this rolled out down the line.